very important. Your soulmate wants to talk to you right now. Don't miss what they have to say. My beloved child. Your soulmate wants to talk to you right now, and what they need to say is something they have been holding back far longer than you realize. Something changed recently. A moment they thought they could ignore brought every hidden feeling rushing back at once, and suddenly staying silent became harder than facing you. But here is the strange part. They are not reaching for you simply because they miss you. There is one specific truth they believe you deserve to hear directly from them. They have imagined this conversation more than once, how they would begin, what you might ask, whether you would even believe them. And every time they reached the most important sentence, fear stopped them. So what could be powerful enough to make them finally consider breaking that silence now? The answer begins with something they recently realized about the distance between you. For a long time, your soulmate convinced themselves that stepping back was safer. They believed there would always be another opportunity, another day, another perfect moment to explain everything. Then something happened that made them question that assumption. They heard something, noticed something, or understood a detail differently than before. And suddenly they wondered whether they had already waited too long. That thought shook them. Because beneath everything they never told you is a confession. There were moments when you thought they did not care, but their silence was hiding a completely different struggle. Don't skip, because what they want to explain next changes the meaning of something from your past together. And once you understand it, you may look at their behavior very differently. Your soulmate keeps returning to one memory involving you, and this is where the conversation becomes deeply personal. There was a moment when you gave them an opening to be honest. Maybe it was something you said, a question you asked, or simply the way you looked at them when you needed clarity. They almost told you everything then. Almost. Instead, they chose words that protected them while leaving you confused, and they have regretted that decision ever since. Now they want to correct what they allowed you to believe. But before they speak, they are wrestling with one terrifying question. If they finally tell you the complete truth, will it bring you closer, or prove they waited too long? Because there is one sentence they have been rehearsing privately, and the reason they were afraid to say it is about to reveal what they truly wanted from you all along. The sentence they have been rehearsing is painfully simple: I never wanted to lose you. I just didn't know how to ask you to stay. But even that confession is only the surface of what they need you to understand. Your soulmate knows there were times when their actions told a completely different story. They pulled away when they wanted closeness. They became quiet when there were 1,000 things they wanted to say. And when you needed reassurance most, fear convinced them that showing too much emotion would leave them vulnerable. Now they finally see what that silence cost. They realize you may have interpreted their distance as rejection when, privately, they were struggling with feelings that had become impossible to control. But something happened recently that made hiding those feelings feel even more dangerous than revealing them. It happened when your soulmate heard your name unexpectedly. There was no warning, no time to prepare their expression or pretend they felt nothing. Someone mentioned you casually, but your soulmate's reaction was anything but casual. Their entire mood shifted. Suddenly they remembered the conversations, the unfinished questions, and especially that moment when they could have told you the truth but chose silence instead. That was when one uncomfortable realization became impossible to escape: you might eventually stop waiting for an explanation that never comes. What if you meet someone who gives you the honesty they withheld? What if one day they finally reach out and discover your heart has already moved somewhere they can no longer follow? Stay till the end, because that fear pushed them toward a decision they had avoided for far too long. Your soulmate has now decided that if they get the chance to speak with you, they do not want another half-conversation filled with carefully chosen words. They want to answer the question they suspect has remained somewhere inside you. Why did you treat me like I mattered, then suddenly act as though I didn't? And their answer may surprise you, because according to what they have finally admitted to themselves, the change was never caused by losing feelings for you. It happened because those feelings were becoming stronger, and stronger feelings brought consequences they were not prepared to face. There was a choice connected to you that frightened them enough to retreat instead of explaining themselves. They thought distance would make that choice disappear. It didn't. And now, after everything that has happened, they are ready to tell you exactly what that choice was, and why making it could change both of your lives. That choice was whether to keep living safely behind their walls or finally admit that what they felt for you demanded something real from them. Your soulmate understood that choosing you emotionally meant they could no longer hide behind uncertainty, bad timing, or unfinished circumstances. They would have to become honest about what they wanted. And that frightened them more than they expected. So instead of telling you, "You matter enough for me to change something," they hesitated. They told themselves they needed more time. But while they were waiting to feel ready, they began noticing something unsettling: you were changing too. You were becoming quieter, stronger, less willing to chase answers. And suddenly they realized the person they assumed would always be there might actually be learning how to live without them. That realization is why this conversation feels urgent now. Your soulmate has started replaying the smallest details: the last time your voice sounded different, the moment you stopped asking certain questions, the way your energy seemed to pull back after receiving another unclear answer. Those details once seemed insignificant. Now they look like warnings. They understand that silence does not freeze a relationship in place, sometimes it slowly closes a door. And there is one thing they desperately want to correct before that happens. They believe you may still be carrying a painful misunderstanding about why they withdrew. Something huge is waiting for you, because the explanation involves a promise they quietly made to themselves after one particular moment with you. A promise they never expected you to discover. They made that promise after realizing they had hurt you without ever intending to. Instead of immediately coming forward, they decided they would fix themselves first and return only when they could offer something more certain than confusing words. But that private plan created an unexpected problem. While they were trying to become ready, you were left with no explanation at all. Now they understand that protecting you from their uncertainty may have looked exactly like abandoning you. That truth has been weighing heavily on them, and it is why they no longer want to wait for some perfect future moment. They want to speak now, imperfectly but honestly. Yet there is still one piece they have not revealed: the exact moment they realized their feelings for you were no longer something they could walk away from. And what happened in that moment is the reason they are preparing to tell you something you never expected to hear. The moment they knew they could no longer walk away came when they tried to imagine their future without you in it. At first, your soulmate thought the exercise would bring relief. They pictured moving forward, building new routines, letting time quietly erase whatever remained between you. But something unexpected happened. Every version of that future felt incomplete. Ordinary moments kept reminding them of conversations they wanted to have with you, places they wished you could see, and words they had never found the courage to say. That was when they finally understood the difference between simply missing someone and realizing that person had become deeply important. And one question started haunting them: if they already knew how much you mattered, why were they still behaving as though losing you was acceptable? That question forced them to confront something they had avoided for a long time. Their biggest obstacle was never you. It was the fear of what would happen after they became completely honest. What if you asked why they waited? What if you reminded them of the nights you needed clarity and received silence instead? They know there are questions they cannot escape anymore, and surprisingly, they no longer want to escape them. They would rather hear your disappointment than continue wondering what could have happened if they had simply spoken. Don't skip, because this is where their decision becomes serious. Your soulmate has been mentally preparing to tell you something without excuses. They know they mishandled what existed between you, and they are willing to accept that saying, "I cared," cannot magically erase the moments when their actions made you doubt it. But there is another reason they want this conversation right now, and this part surprised even them. Recently, they realized they were still making choices based on the possibility of you being in their future. Without openly admitting it, they had been leaving emotional space for you. That realization exposed something they could no longer deny. Despite the distance, they had never completely closed the door. Now they want to know whether you closed yours. They are not expecting you to forget everything or immediately trust every word. They simply want one honest chance to explain what happened and hear what you truly feel in return. Yet before they can ask you for that chance, there is one confession they believe must come first, a confession about something they almost did during the period of silence. They stopped themselves at the very last moment, and the reason they stopped had everything to do with you. What they almost did was make a permanent decision based on a temporary belief that you had already stopped caring. Your soulmate had convinced themselves that your silence meant you were finished, so they began preparing to close the chapter completely. They considered removing reminders, abandoning the possibility of another conversation, and forcing themselves toward a future where your name would no longer influence their choices. But when the moment came to actually do it, they froze. One memory surfaced with startling clarity, something you once said that made them question whether they had misunderstood you all along. Suddenly, the certainty disappeared. What if your distance was not indifference? What if you had simply become tired of being the only one waiting for honesty? That possibility changed everything. For the first time, your soulmate looked at the situation from your side instead of their own. They remembered how many mixed signals they had given you. How often they expected you to understand feelings they never clearly expressed. How many times they wanted you to stay while behaving as though your presence made no difference. And then came the realization they could no longer defend. Perhaps you did not walk away because your feelings disappeared. Perhaps you stepped back because continuing without clarity was hurting you. That thought hit them harder than rejection would have, because it meant their fear may have created the very distance they were afraid of. Now there is something they desperately need to ask you, but they know they cannot ask until they reveal what they were hiding when everything between you began to change. And this hidden truth is more personal than they originally intended to admit. During the time when they seemed most distant, your soulmate was privately imagining a serious future conversation with you. Not a casual reunion. Not another emotional exchange that disappeared the next morning. They were thinking about what it would actually require to rebuild trust and whether they were capable of giving you the consistency they knew you deserved. That is why they stopped themselves from closing the door completely. Something inside them refused to make a final decision without hearing your truth first. But now another question has emerged, and it may be the most important one yet. If they finally come forward without excuses, are they prepared to tell you everything, even the one detail they have deliberately kept hidden because they fear it could completely change how you see them? That detail is exactly what they are preparing to confess. The detail they have been afraid to confess is that there was a moment when they knew you were waiting for reassurance, and they deliberately stayed silent. Not because they wanted to hurt you. Not because someone else suddenly became more important. They stayed silent because they had convinced themselves that speaking honestly would create expectations they were terrified they could not fulfill. Your soulmate thought withholding the truth would protect both of you from disappointment. Instead, they watched the distance grow and slowly realized their silence had caused exactly what they were trying to prevent. Now they want to admit something difficult. They knew you deserved an explanation much earlier. They simply did not have the courage to give it. And there is one particular message they almost sent you during that period that reveals just how close they came to changing everything. They wrote that message late in an emotional moment, then erased it before you ever saw it. The words were more vulnerable than anything they had previously allowed themselves to say. They wanted to tell you that pretending not to care was becoming exhausting. They wanted to ask whether there was still something worth saving between you. Most importantly, they wanted to admit that every attempt to convince themselves they were finished with the connection had failed. Their finger hovered over the send button, but fear won again. By morning, the message was gone, yet the feelings behind it remained. And now they keep wondering what would have happened if they had sent it. Would you have answered? Would one honest conversation have prevented months of confusion? That unanswered question is one reason they no longer want another important moment to disappear because they were afraid. But what they are preparing to say now goes beyond that deleted message. Your soulmate has realized that contacting you means accepting whatever answer you give, even if it is not the answer they hope to hear. They cannot demand another chance simply because they finally found their courage. They know trust may need to be rebuilt slowly. Still, there is something they need you to know before you decide anything. Their silence was never proof that you meant nothing. In fact, the truth may have been painfully opposite. You mattered enough to expose parts of them they had spent years avoiding, and that frightened them into retreating. Now they are ready to stop hiding behind that fear. Yet there is one question they intend to ask you when the conversation finally happens, and your answer could determine everything that follows. It is not, "Do you still love me?" The question is far deeper, and they have been terrified to ask it until now. The question they are terrified to ask is, "Did I make you feel like you were never enough for me?" That possibility has been sitting heavily on your soulmate because they are finally seeing how their silence may have looked from your side. While they were fighting their own fear, you may have been questioning your worth, replaying conversations, wondering what you could have done differently. And that was never what they wanted you to believe. If they get this conversation with you, they want to correct that first. They want you to know that their hesitation was about what they could not handle inside themselves, not about something you lacked. But there is another reason this question matters so much. Your answer could reveal whether the damage between you is something honesty can repair, or whether they waited until your feelings changed completely. Your soulmate has even imagined what they would do if you answered, "Yes, you did make me feel that way." They know defending themselves would only repeat the same mistake. So this time, they want to listen. They want to hear the moments that hurt you, including the ones they may not remember the same way. That is a major shift, because before, they were focused on explaining themselves. Now they understand that talking to you cannot simply be about delivering a confession and expecting everything to become beautiful again. They need to understand your truth too. And while thinking about that, another memory returned, one they had pushed aside because it made them uncomfortable. It was the last time you gave them a subtle opportunity to come closer, and they responded in a way they now deeply regret. They remember sensing that you were waiting for something more from them. Maybe not a dramatic declaration, just one unmistakable sign that you mattered. Your soulmate noticed it, felt the weight of that moment, and still chose the safer response. What they did not understand then was that you might not offer that opening forever. Now they wonder whether that was the exact moment something inside you began to change. Stay till the end, because they have finally connected that memory to something that happened afterward, and the connection startled them. A small change in your behavior, something they barely noticed at the time, now looks like the moment you stopped expecting them to choose you. And once your soulmate recognized it, they made a private decision about what they would do if they were ever given one more opportunity. That decision is far more serious than simply sending you a message. That private decision was this. If they ever received another real opportunity with you, they would stop asking you to interpret hints and finally speak with complete clarity. Your soulmate no longer wants to hide behind vague words, delayed replies, or conversations that leave you wondering what they actually meant. They have realized that uncertainty became a shield for them but a burden for you. So if they reach you now, they want to say exactly where they stand, even if their voice shakes while saying it. They want to admit what they regret, what they still feel, and what they are realistically prepared to do differently. But before that conversation happens, they have one fear left, the possibility that you will hear their honesty and quietly say, "I needed this from you much earlier." They have imagined that response more times than they would admit. And strangely, instead of making them run again, it has forced them to become more serious. They understand that wanting another chance and deserving one are two different things. They cannot erase the confusion simply because they finally understand it. What they can do is show you that this conversation is not another emotional impulse that disappears tomorrow. Your soulmate has been asking themselves uncomfortable questions. Can I become consistent? Can I communicate when I am afraid instead of disappearing? Can I respect their boundaries if they need time? Those questions have led them towards something unexpected. They are no longer preparing only an apology. They are preparing to tell you what they would actually change if you allowed them back into your life. And this is where their message becomes more important than anything they have said before. Your soulmate does not want to promise perfection. They know you would recognize empty promises immediately. Instead, they want to offer something specific, no more making you guess where you stand, no more retreating without explanation, and no more expecting you to carry the emotional weight alone. But there is one commitment they have not even spoken aloud yet because saying it would make everything undeniably real. It involves a future decision they once believed they could postpone indefinitely. Now they believe postponing it could cost them you completely. And before they ask whether there is still a place for them in your life, they intend to reveal exactly what they are finally willing to choose. What they decided may explain why talking to you suddenly feels so urgent right now. What they are finally willing to choose is certainty over fear. For the first time, your soulmate understands that keeping every option open was never protecting their future. It was slowly destroying the one connection they could not emotionally replace. They have spent too long waiting for circumstances to become perfect before showing you where you truly stood. Now they know perfection was only an excuse to delay a difficult decision. If they speak to you, they want to make one thing unmistakably clear: they are no longer asking you to remain emotionally available while they figure themselves out. They want to tell you what they are prepared to choose and then let their actions prove whether those words deserve your trust. But something happened while they were reaching this decision that made the conversation suddenly feel far more urgent. Your soulmate recently noticed a change they could not ignore. You were no longer occupying the same emotional position they had grown accustomed to. Whether through your silence, your independence, or simply the absence of the attention they once expected, something felt different. And instead of assuming you would eventually return to the old pattern, they finally considered the possibility that you had begun protecting your own peace. That realization frightened them because it meant time was no longer standing still while they hesitated. They began asking themselves a question they had avoided for months. What if they are not waiting anymore? The answer forced them to confront another uncomfortable truth. They had been expecting access to your heart without giving you the security necessary to keep that access open. Now they know the next move cannot belong to you. It has to belong to them. That is why what they want to say is becoming clearer. They are not preparing to ask you to chase them, rescue them, or immediately forget what happened. They want to approach you differently and acknowledge that you have every right to decide what happens next. But before handing that choice to you, they intend to reveal something they have never explained. There was a specific reason they kept believing they had more time with you. Something you once did convince them that your connection could survive almost anything, and they held on to that belief far longer than they should have. Now they realize they may have mistaken your patience for permanence. And when they finally understood the difference, one memory came rushing back, a memory containing words you once said that they completely misunderstood at the time. Those words now mean something entirely different to them, and what they believe you were actually trying to tell them has changed their next move completely. Those words sounded ordinary when you first said them, but your soulmate now realizes there was something deeper underneath. You were asking for honesty without demanding it. You were giving them room to step forward voluntarily, hoping they would recognize what the moment required. Instead, they interpreted your patience as proof that there would always be another opportunity. They thought, I can explain later. They understand me. But now they see the painful difference between someone understanding your fear and someone agreeing to live indefinitely inside your uncertainty. That realization has changed how they remember your final conversations. Details they once dismissed now feel unmistakable: the shorter responses, the questions you stopped asking, the moment you seemed to accept an answer that clearly did not satisfy you. And there is one particular sentence of yours they cannot stop replaying because they finally understand what may have been hidden inside it. You never threatened to leave. You never needed to. Somewhere in your words was a quiet message: I cannot keep proving that I care while wondering whether you do. Your soulmate did not fully hear that message then because they were consumed by their own confusion. Now it lands differently. They understand that your patience may have been love, but eventually protecting yourself became necessary. And this is why their next move matters so much. They know another vague message will accomplish nothing. A casual, "How have you been?" would avoid the very truth they are finally trying to face. So they have been thinking about beginning differently, with an acknowledgement that places no pressure on you. I know I left you with questions, and if you're willing to hear me, I want to answer them honestly. But even that is not the sentence they are most nervous to say. The sentence they fear most comes afterward, because it removes every hiding place they once used. They want to admit, I kept waiting for you to show me I was safe, while never giving you the same safety in return. That realization has humbled them more than any argument ever could. Your soulmate finally sees that love cannot survive forever on assumptions, private feelings, and unspoken intentions. At some point, someone has to become brave enough to make things clear. This time, they believe that person must be them. But before they approach you, they are preparing themselves for one possibility they never wanted to consider. You may listen carefully, accept their apology, and still decide not to reopen the door. Surprisingly, they have already decided what they will say if that happens. And the words they have chosen reveal whether this conversation is truly about loving you, or simply being afraid to lose you. If you decide not to reopen that door, your soulmate has promised themselves they will not turn their confession into pressure. They want to say, I will respect your decision, but I needed you to finally know the truth. That sentence matters because it proves something has shifted inside them. Before, fear made them focus almost entirely on what they might lose. Now they are beginning to understand that caring about you also means respecting what you need, even when it hurts them. Yet there is something they secretly hope happens before you make any final decision. They hope you ask one question they have been preparing themselves to answer without hiding anything: why now? After all this time, why are you suddenly ready to talk? Their answer begins with a realization they had when they stopped blaming timing, circumstances, and uncertainty for everything that happened. They recognized a pattern in themselves. Whenever something became emotionally serious, they stepped backward and waited for the other person to make things feel safe again. But with you, that pattern finally became impossible to ignore because losing your closeness hurt more than facing the fear that caused them to retreat. They realized they could continue protecting themselves and eventually watch you disappear, or they could risk being completely known by you. For once, they chose the second possibility. And there is another detail they want you to hear. Their decision was not made during one dramatic emotional night. It became stronger over several quiet moments when they kept discovering that the feelings they expected to fade simply were not fading. Now your soulmate wants to tell you about the final moment that pushed them beyond hesitation. It happened when they imagined hearing that you had truly moved forward, not as a threat, not as jealousy, but as a reality they knew could eventually happen. Their first reaction was fear. Their second was regret. But the third surprised them, clarity. They suddenly understood that if they remained silent and lost every possibility with you, they would have nobody else to blame. That is when they stopped asking whether speaking was risky and started asking whether silence was even riskier. Something huge is waiting for you, because that realization led them to prepare one final truth they believe you should hear before anything else is decided. It concerns what they actually want from you now, and it is very different from what you might expect. What they actually want from you now is not an instant promise, and that may be the most important change of all. Your soulmate is not expecting you to erase the past, rush back toward them, or give them an answer before you are ready. What they want first is one completely honest conversation where neither of you has to pretend. They want to hear what the silence did to you, what changed inside you, and whether there is anything left that deserves another chance. But there is one request they are quietly hoping to make. Before you decide what happens next, they want you to judge them by what they are willing to do now, not only by the frightened person they were before. And they know that request will mean nothing unless they can back it with something real. That is why they have been thinking beyond words. Your soulmate has identified one behavior that must change immediately if they are ever allowed close to you again, disappearing when emotions become difficult. They know another unexplained retreat would destroy whatever trust remained. So they have made a private rule for themselves: when fear appears, they will communicate instead of vanish. When something bothers them, they will say it instead of making you decode silence. When they need time, they will explain that instead of leaving you wondering whether you did something wrong. These may sound like simple things, but for someone who spent so long protecting themselves through distance, they represent a serious change. Still, your soulmate knows you may hear all of this and ask the question they cannot answer with promises: how do I know you won't become afraid again? They have been preparing for that question too, and their answer is unexpectedly vulnerable. They cannot promise they will never feel afraid again. They can only promise that fear will no longer be allowed to make every decision. That distinction matters to them now. They finally understand that courage does not mean arriving without fear. It means refusing to let fear keep hurting someone you care about. And this realization has brought them to the most delicate part of what they want to tell you. There is one thing they never stopped hoping for during the distance, even when they acted as though they had accepted losing you. They kept it private because admitting it would expose exactly how deeply this connection affected them. Now they believe hiding it would defeat the entire purpose of reaching out. And when they finally tell you what they have secretly been hoping for, you may understand why this conversation has become impossible for them to postpone any longer. What they secretly kept hoping for was not that you would wait forever. It was that, somehow, there would still be one honest moment left between you before the distance became permanent. Your soulmate imagined running into you unexpectedly, receiving a simple message, or finding some natural reason to finally say what fear had buried. But eventually they realized something uncomfortable: waiting for the perfect opening was simply another form of hiding. If this conversation truly mattered, they could not keep depending on you to create it. They would have to risk being the one who reached across the silence. And that realization brought another question they had been avoiding: if you never contacted them again, would they really be willing to let everything remain unfinished? Their answer was no. Not because they believe they are entitled to another place in your life, but because they cannot continue pretending there is nothing important left to say. They want you to understand what happened without forcing you toward any particular outcome. They want to admit where they failed you, explain what they were afraid of, and finally ask what the experience was like from your side. But there is something else they have decided. They will not begin by telling you how much they suffered during the separation. They know that could make the conversation about gaining your sympathy. Instead, they want to begin with what you deserved and did not receive: clarity. That choice reveals how differently they are approaching you now. Yet there is still one truth they fear could make you question everything they tell you. That truth concerns the exact point when they first understood they might lose you. It happened earlier than you would expect. Long before their recent realization, your soulmate noticed you becoming emotionally quieter, and part of them already knew why. They sensed that their inconsistency was exhausting you. They recognized the warning, but instead of moving closer, they became even more hesitant because admitting what was happening would force them to confront their own behavior. Now they want to confess that they saw the distance forming and failed to stop it. That may be difficult to hear, but they believe you deserve the complete truth rather than a polished version that makes them look better. And there is one more detail from that period they have never admitted: the private reason they kept convincing themselves you would eventually come back toward them. Once that reason is revealed, you may finally understand the assumption that kept them silent for far too long. The assumption that kept them silent was painfully simple. Your soulmate believed the connection between you was strong enough to survive their hesitation without explanation. They remembered every time you had shown patience, every moment you had looked beyond their guarded behavior, and every occasion when you stayed even though they made closeness difficult. Somewhere along the way, they began treating your patience like a guarantee. They told themselves that if the bond was real, you would understand eventually. What they failed to ask was how long understanding could survive without reassurance. Now they see the unfairness of expecting your heart to remain open while giving you so little certainty in return. And this realization has uncovered another truth they are almost ashamed to admit: part of them was waiting for you to break the silence first. They imagined your name appearing on their screen. They pictured you asking one more question, giving one more sign, creating one more opportunity for them to respond without having to risk rejection first. But each day that did not happen taught them something. Your silence was not necessarily punishment. It could have been a boundary. You may have finally decided that if they wanted a place in your life, they needed to demonstrate it themselves. That possibility completely changed their thinking. Instead of wondering, "Why haven't they reached out?" your soulmate began asking, "Why am I expecting them to do what I'm too afraid to do?" That question stripped away their excuses. And when they answered it honestly, they realized the next conversation could not begin with what they wanted from you. It had to begin with what they were finally prepared to take responsibility for. Now they are rehearsing words very different from anything they would have said before: "You should never have had to chase clarity from me." They want to acknowledge that caring privately was not enough when their actions communicated uncertainty. They also understand something else. You may have changed during the silence. The version of you who once waited patiently may no longer exist, and they cannot approach you expecting the same response they might have received months ago. That scares them, but it also makes them more determined to speak truthfully. Because recently, your soulmate imagined looking directly at you and realized there is one question they need answered more than whether you still have feelings. They need to know whether there is any trust left beneath everything that happened. And before they ask you that question, they are preparing to reveal the one action they believe could prove their intentions are no longer just words. The action they believe could prove their intentions is consistency after the conversation is over. Your soulmate finally understands that one emotional confession cannot repair what months of uncertainty created. Anyone can say powerful words when they are afraid of losing someone. The real test begins afterward, when emotions settle, when ordinary days return, and when fear whispers that disappearing would be easier than explaining. That is exactly where they intend to behave differently. If you need space, they want to respect it without turning cold. If you ask a difficult question, they want to answer instead of avoiding it. And if they promise to show up, they know they must actually show up. But while imagining all of this, they realized something else. Before they can prove anything through consistency, they first need permission to enter your world again. That realization has changed the way they plan to approach you. They no longer want to arrive with dramatic demands or make you responsible for calming their fear. Instead, they are considering one simple question: would you be willing to have an honest conversation with me? Nothing more at first. No pressure to define the relationship. No expectation that one conversation will erase everything. Your soulmate knows your answer could be yes, no, or even, I need time, and they are preparing themselves to respect all three. Yet there is one possibility they secretly hope for. They hope you say yes and then ask them the question they have avoided answering for the longest time: what exactly do you want with me now? Because for once, they believe they finally have an answer that is not built on confusion. And that answer is becoming clearer every day. They do not want another temporary return where emotions become intense, promises are made, and fear eventually pushes everything backward again. They want the chance to discover whether something stable can actually be rebuilt between you, slowly, honestly, without pretending the past never happened. But there is one condition they have placed on themselves before asking you for that chance. They must tell you something they once planned never to reveal, because hiding it would mean begin.